Hey, this video is about the connection between Forgeworld, Warhammer Forge, and Age of Sigmar. And usually when we discuss Forgeworld, it's in the context of 40k and the widespread support that the company supplies that game. The support and range of miniatures provided by Forgeworld is really quite extraordinary. They produce some amazing kits, and of course Horus Heresy or 30k is also strongly supported by Forgeworld, almost entirely. But this video, I'm mostly interested in the future of Forgeworld and Age of Sigmar. So I think that it could be fairly bright, and I certainly hope that's the case. So recently I celebrated my birthday, and I decided to add a miniature to my collection that has special significance. I looked for something that was relatively cheap but different, and Forgeworld is a good place for these types of things, especially if you want a unique Warhammer miniature, something that most people don't have. So I chose Leopold the Black, mostly because I'm working on my Free Peoples project that cannot ever seem to end. I'm pretty slow going, but in general, he's basically an Empire general. But he's a beautiful model, and the fluff, as it is, says Border Prince, Mercenary General, Wanted Criminal, and Dastardly Sellsword. Leopold the Black, also known as Leopold the Thrice Cursed, Leopold the Butcher, and Leopold the Liar, is a man to whom profit is more valued than honor or loyalty. Leopold is a vain, arrogant, vicious, paranoid, and cruel despot, as bloody a tyrant as any of the border princes. So some kind of interesting lore there that, frankly, you'll probably never find anywhere else other than the Forgeworld website. But today, Leopold the Black is simply a free guild general on horse with an inflated price tag, but his legacy will certainly live on in my collection. I love looking for unique models to have a special significance in my collection, so that I can know that this model coincides with this event or something like that. It just gives them more of a personal touch. But when the model arrives, and this is the main point of the video, it was packaged as Warhammer Forge. And basically every Warhammer Fantasy battle model produced by Forgeworld was labeled as Warhammer Forge several years ago. It's really the portion of Forgeworld that produces fantasy models. And they really produced an interesting, fantastical range of models, but they never seemed to be too successful at moving the product. And Warhammer Forge really just seemed to wither away. It really launched, I think, at the tail end of 7th, and of course it pretty much petered out with the end of 8th. It's a real shame because I had such a high hope for the range of miniatures that Forgeworld was producing. So a couple of months ago I actually picked up Monstrous Arcanum. It's a book that had been on my wish list for a long time, and that's book was produced or published in 2012, shortly after I think Warhammer Forge was launched officially, and about a year after Tamurkhan, Throne of Chaos, I believe, was released. So like Tamurkhan, there's a real sense that Monstrous Arcanum was meant to be part of a larger series, and it's actually on the spine numbered as book 1 of some unknown number. Presumably they had in mind many other books in the series. So Forgeworld often produces large-scale models, and Monstrous Arcanum goes into detail about all the fantastical beasts of the world of Warhammer Fantasy. And there's a real sense at that time, and certainly I felt it as someone in the hobby, that this was going to be launching this far larger product line. And they did actually, as I said, they did produce quite a number of models. I just don't know anyone that actually bought them. So now I'm going to bring this around to Age of Sigmar. So naturally, the existing line of models produced by Forgeworld in their fantasy line are actually usable in AoS. And some, like the Morngul, have actually become fairly popular. So there's definitely a link there between playability and the rules. You know, the rules for the Morngul were amazing, and that certainly inspired many people to buy plenty of Morngul. It was actually a tournament last year. There was only like 8 people in the tournament, and there were like 6 Morngul. So they're popular. I mean, I own 2 myself. But I think there's still, I think in AoS, it's easier to incorporate the Forgeworld models. In the more competitive atmosphere of Warhammer Fantasy battles, I think there was just a sense that this was a different company, and these were not official models. Like, you just really couldn't bring them as openly to games because people just didn't see them. They weren't just widely recognized. And I think that was one potential barrier that Age of Sigmar just doesn't really seem to have. It seems, you know, they produce the rules, you're free to use whatever you want. Most tournaments seem perfectly okay with it, although maybe some might put a restriction on them. So basically, since the launch of AoS, Forgeworld has released some models that support the game. I'm mostly thinking of, there are a few others, but it's mostly Skarak the Bloodborne, which is like the big Korgoroth. You have a Mazaral the Butcher, who's like a Khorne demon, I think. And most recently, the giant Khorne dragon unveiled at Warhammer Fest 2018. So, but however, some of these really predate AoS in their conception, that they were designed or imagined prior to AoS. And in some cases, they were actually meant to be a different model than they ended up. So they were originally designed to be something more akin to the Warhammer Fantasy line, and then they kind of redesigned it. So I think there's definitely room for a fantastical, large-scale models in Warhammer Fantasy. But the mechanics and the competitive nature of that game, where everything needed to be perfectly ranked up, it just made it a little bit more difficult to use. And I think, you know, that Age of Sigmar is a better medium for these large-scale and crazy creatures, both in terms of the game mechanics, but also because in terms of the lore, anything is really possible in the Mortal Realms. You can really think of any crazy creature, and it could exist. And I think that is something that is, you know, it opens up a lot of possibilities, as I've talked about a lot. So I'm really hopeful that Warhammer Forge will continue the trend, or Forgeworld will continue the trend, and produce more models that support AoS. And Forgeworld has always favored mostly Chaos models, but I certainly hope that they expand into other factions as they go. The logo, of course, for Warhammer Forge will need to be rebranded, given that it's really from 8th edition, but I would still love to see the full support of Forgeworld behind AoS, and I think, as I said, I think that there's good possibilities there. So time will tell. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.